In the shadowed depths of Raven Hollow, a place whispered about in hushed tones and veiled with superstition. The sky was a heavy blanket of clouds, suffocating the last remnants of twilight as Eli, a young researcher drawn by the lore of forgotten myths, ventured into the heart of the woods. His descent into a night of unspeakable terror began under a blood-red moon. Legends had led him to these haunted woods, whispered tales of nightmarish creatures that thrived in the oppressive darkness. Skeptical yet irresistibly drawn, he sought to uncover the truth behind the myths of the night whisperers, vampires rumored to devour both flesh and soul. As night enveloped the woods, Eli approached an ancient cabin. Its walls groaned under the burden of centuries, and its windows, like blind eyes, stared out into the encroaching gloom. He pushed open the door, the creak of its hinges echoing like a moan through the hollow silence of the forest. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of rot, and the silence was suffocating. Eli's lantern cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock his growing dread. He set up his equipment, a small lantern casting eerie shadows on the wooden walls, and began to read through the local lore he had collected. Tales of the night whisperers, vampires said to have haunted Raven Hollow since the Dark Ages, captivated his attention. They were said to be drawn by the presence of the living, lured from their hidden lairs by the pulse of human hearts and the flow of warm blood. Eli's fascination turned to unease as the wind began to howl outside, a symphony of whispers that seemed to call his name, saying, "Stay. Join. Eternal." The words were seductive, yet filled with an ancient hunger. He shook off the creeping dread, attributing it to the atmosphere of the cabin and his vivid imagination. Deciding he needed fresh air, he stepped outside, the door shutting behind him with a definitive thud. Once outside, a soft whispering had begun, like the rustling of leaves, but unnervingly articulate, forming words that seemed to slither into his ears. "Stay. Join. Eternal." The words were seductive, yet filled with an ancient hunger. These whispers weren't mere breezes but the breath of the undead, and they chilled Eli to his core. He scanned the darkness to see where the whispers had come from, only to be met by the piercing gaze of red eyes, nestled in the darkest parts of the forest. The eyes moved closer, the darkness parting to reveal that these eyes belonged to figures that were grotesquely human, their skin pallid and stretched taut over protruding bones. Their lips were stained with old blood, and when they smiled, their mouths were caverns of sharp, jagged fangs dripping with fresh gore. One of them moved towards Eli, its movements a sickening lurch. Panicked, Eli retreated into the cabin, his heart pounding a desperate rhythm. He scrambled to barricade the door with anything he could find. Outside, the creature's fingers scratched at the wooden door, their nails leaving grooves in the aged timber. They hissed and spat, a vile sound that filled the night air. The vampires did not seem hurried. They waited outside, their whispers permeating the walls, seeping into the cabin like damp. Eli could hear them speaking in a language he did not understand, their voices a chilling caress against his sanity. As hours dragged by, the vampires grew more aggressive. A thin, bony hand smashed through a window, its skin sizzling as it touched the blessed crucifix hanging on the wall. Blackened flesh smoked, and the creature withdrew with an unearthly scream of agony, leaving behind smeared blood and bits of decayed flesh. Eli clutched the crucifix, whispering prayers into the dense, fear-charged air. The first light of dawn was his only hope, a distant promise as the vampire's assault intensified. They spoke in tongues of old, their words slicing through the air like knives. Sacrifice. Blood. Forever. At the edge of dawn, with the cabin walls splattered with unholy remnants, the siege waned. The vampires, foiled by the approaching sunlight, retreated into the darkness, their snarls echoing long after they had vanished. Thinking that he would be safe if he made it back into town, however, he was wrong. Exhausted and terror-stricken, Eli dared not leave the safety of his sanctuary until the sun was high. His escape from the cabin was a frantic sprint, the horrors of the night clawing at his back. Reaching the town by dusk, Eli sought refuge in a small inn. The nightmare, however, was far from over. As night once again cloaked the world in shadow, a familiar tapping at his window began. Heart sinking, Eli turned to see them, the Night Whisperers, their bodies horrifically mutilated by their failed earlier entry, yet their hunger undiminished. The window shattered, sending shards of glass like shrapnel through the room. The vampires entered, their forms a grotesque display of supernatural malice. Eli's screams were lost amid the chaos as they descended upon him, their fangs tearing at his flesh. The room became an abattoir, blood splattering walls and soaking into the wood, his cries curdling into gurgles of agony. When the sun rose, the innkeeper found the room eerily silent, the morning light revealing a scene of carnage. Eli was gone, vanished without a trace, save for the blood that painted the room in ghastly hues. His belongings remained, untouched amidst the chaos, a grim testament to his horrific end. In the shadows of Raven Hollow, the Night Whisperers lingered, their thirst unquenched, whispering into the winds for their next victim to stray into their eternal night.